Dave.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hello.
Let's get this meeting started then. We'll call it to order. It's 1:03. Roll call. We have with us committee members Angus McDonald and Joan Gay. Ex officio board chair Leslie Strauss, executive director Joe Comerford, and our consultant David Lee. So thank you all for coming in. We'll see if we can move through these items with ease and dispatch. I think we probably will have an executive session to discuss some more sensitive items. The first item, next item rather on the agenda is a discussion of the project timeline. This is a just a roadmap for all the things that have to happen in order for us to meet two deadlines that we established with the Middletown Joint Committee. The one is that the Middletown and Estuary boards would sign a final MOA on February 1st, and that we would use the time during February to negotiate with DOT and hopefully have a three-party signature by March 1st. This timeline has a typo in it that I apologize for. The very last item says 3/31/21 DOT signs MOA. That's supposed to be 3/1, not the end of March. I mean, it could certainly drag on a little bit longer than that, but that's basically. And what's not included in here are any other meetings that our committee or Middletown's committee may choose to have on their own, and or any special meetings we may call with the boards to, you know, get feedback from the board or approval, depending on how we want to handle certain issues. I hadn't planned to go through this line by line because I think it's pretty self-explanatory, unless anybody has any other questions on some of the items or suggestions for change, which we can do. And obviously this is a suggested roadmap. We're going to likely change things as we move along, but you can see from here that it's a pretty aggressive time frame. There's a lot that needs to get done and decided and discussed between now and February 1st. So Joan, you or Angus have any comments or suggestions?
No, only that I agree that it's an aggressive timeline and I hope we could meet it.
Mm-hmm. Well, the way we can look at it is that this is our timeline unless we decide it isn't.
Right. Sorry, I was muted when I was responding, but my response was almost the same as Joan's. I think it's aggressive, but there's nothing wrong with being aggressive and trying to get it done.
I think the way we need to look at it is that if things are easily agreed to and we move faster, that's great. If on the other hand, we hit a few stumbling blocks, it's important. We need to take time to go over it. And if that means we add to the timetable, then that's what we have to do.
Yep.
Okay.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
I'm pretty sure I know the answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Is there any provision in the state statutes or in the DOT bylaws in terms of if we don't come to an agreement, could this go to mediation and arbitration, or is it just we don't come to agreement, no merger?
An excellent question. I don't know the answer to that. Joe, do you have a sense on that?
Well, we're independent districts. The only statute would be the ones that creates the districts that gives us total authority. I mean, CONDOT officially has no authority over us to make us do anything. Mm-hmm. You know, it always just comes down to the money.
What The only thing we have governing this is a regional bus study
Mhm.
that's recommended everything.
Right.
And if we can't come to agreement, then I guess we agree to walk away.
Right. That's my understanding of this, as far as, from the Council of Governments, from the governmental end of this. And obviously there's an opportunity for me to have missed something, but there's nothing in this study or nothing in statute that mandates that this merger take place.
No.
This is simply a suggested merger that has an awful lot of moving parts.
Mhm.
Yeah, and only the towns and the districts can decide to do it.
Of course, there are indirect ways that our decision-making can be influenced.
Yes, absolutely. Right. And that has a lot of pull over the money, but the only ones that officially can make the decision are the towns and the districts. But that's right. They control the purse strings. So
There's really two answers to the question. So officially, Joan, nobody, we're not required to do anything. Unofficially, there can be pressure through other means, which we have seen in the past. So I think that we need to bear in mind too how we want to handle elements of that question as we go through this process. And one of the things I want to discuss in executive session is related to your question. So we'll kind of circle back to that. Okay, so here, this is a timeline. It's as good as anything that you write down. It can be out of date in 5 minutes. Can I just assume that everyone is reasonably comfortable with it as it stands?
Yes.
With that one change? Okay. Joe and Dave, you can use this then in discussions with the MAT committee. Just so we all have
great.
the same expectations of what we need to accomplish by when. Okay. Next agenda item is entitled MOA Elements. And there are certain items in red ink on this that are potential deal breaker issues. The origin of this document is that quite some time ago, Joe identified a series of issues as the study was getting started at the end of 2018 or 19. John Forbes had done an outline of some issues that were important. And Joe and Dave and I met the week before Thanksgiving to kind of sift through those so that we weren't spending a lot of time on things that didn't seem to make any difference. So what we have here is a distillation by topic of the kinds of things that the three of us anyway felt ought to be included or at least discussed with regard to the MOA. And I think we should go through each of these. And the first item is very significant in terms of how we conduct business between now and when the actual merger were to take place. And one of the things that is recommended here, and let me deal with that first, is a time frame of July 1st, 2022, or roughly a year and a half, for the actual merger to have taken place, which means the member towns have, and MAT has been dissolved, the new member towns are on board, they voted, and we're one staff, one budget, etc. Joe, is that a date that is doable from your perspective?
It's possibly, it's going to be tight. There might need to be 2 transition years.
You had mentioned before that transition should occur concurrent with the fiscal year, which is July 1st.
That's the easiest thing to have happen. But I mean, we could do it otherwise, but it's certainly easier to have it on a fiscal year.
Is it advisable or reasonable for us to think in terms of July 1st of 2022, or should we push it out?
Well, I guess actually, I think you may possibly we may need to see it as July 2022. We officially are joining one, but we still might need a wind down period to wind down
Sure.
whichever one's going away. You know,
Okay.
and the books might still say separate to some extent for some of that year, you know, and it might be really fully complete the following year.
Okay, let's say then that the meat and potatoes occurs by July 1st, 22 as a goal.
Right. Right.
Okay.
And then there'll just be some, like I said, wind down activities going on that year.
Okay, let's use that for planning purposes then. And if we go back to the elements outline, and the first item are the transition issues. There's a major question there, which is, should these things be included in the MOA, which involves DOT sign off, or are these things more appropriate to be embodied in an agreement just between the two districts for the period of the transition? Before we go back and get everyone's opinion on that, let's just quickly run through these and see if there's anything we've left out or anything people want to speak differently about. But during this transition period, which would be from now until, let's say, July 1st of 22, the respective boards of directors would continue to govern their operations. B, Matt and ETD staff would continue to report to the executive director of ETD. ETD executive director continues to report to both boards under arrangements currently in place, including agreements to reimburse estuary for its executive director's time spent on MAT. The finance manager for ETD would continue to oversee finances at MAT, including arrangements currently in place for MAT to reimburse ETD for the finance manager's time spent on MAT. That we have concluded an agreement with First Transit regarding reimbursement for Joe's time. We are very close to an agreement with Matt on Helena's time.
Right.
Current arrangements. This is a very important component, at least for me. Current arrangements assume a 60% executive director and a 75% finance director. Is this really a sufficient level of staffing to manage estuary affairs for nearly 2 more years when responsibilities have not changed accordingly? Essentially, what's happened over the past 2 years since Middletown first imploded is both of these positions at ETD have moved from full-time to part-time. That's happened without really a substantive discussion at the board level with Joe about what the implication of that is, how long we could expect people to handle their responsibilities on a part-time basis. And that's a very significant question, I think, that we may want to go back to the board with.
Susan,
Yes.
can we stop? Do you want us to stop as we have questions, or do you want to keep going through this?
No, stop as we have questions, Angus.
Okay. I'm sorry about this question, but that raises an issue for me that I'd like to understand fully before I move forward with anything on it, really. My understanding at the beginning, a couple of years ago, was that Joe was going to do the work that he was going to do up in Middletown, for the most part, on his own time. He was going to do this as like a second job almost. Not the same. That was not at all what I understood with Helena. But with Joe, that was my understanding, and I'm surprised to see that you know, that we're at 60% of his time is being spent on us. I don't know that we've suffered any by that, but my question really is to clarify for me. And Joe, you're here. You feel free to answer the question, or anyone can. Are you really spending 40% of your week with Middletown of the regular week, or is this, you know, are you doing this on your own time?
Yeah. So, well, it started in December of last year. That's when we took on the extra responsibility of
Yep.
of dealing with Middletown more frequently. Before that,
Seems
it was
like
just
forever ago.
yeah, I know it does. Tell me about it.
Yeah, I know.
Before that, it was just it was very little time. But now it has increased, over the past year.
Okay.
So yeah, 2 days a week I am up there,
Okay.
and 3 days I'm at Estuary.
Now, can you just to firm up a little bit on that? 2 days a week you're up there, 3 days a week you're down here. That doesn't mean that the 3 days a week you're working strictly for Estuary Transit,
No,
and the other 2 days you're working strictly for Middletown. You're combining. You're basically working out of two different offices, managing
exactly.
two companies.
Right.
Okay. All right.
Yeah, right. I don't just like turn off on Tuesdays or Thursdays. I'm usually up in Middletown. I don't just like not answer Estuary emails and only do Middletown work. No,
Okay.
it's just where I'm located.
Okay. That's good. Thanks.
I have a related question here too for Joe. Since you're spending 60% of your time for us, the Estuary Transit District, whereas prior to last year, you were spending 100% time on it. Are any of the ETD duties, responsibilities not being addressed as it before when you were doing 100%, or are you putting in an awful lot of overtime? Because when I heard this at one of our board meetings, it just struck me odd in a way that you went from 100% to 60%.
Well,
Even though I know the reason why.
Yeah, I definitely put in more hours than I used to. And other than that, no. I mean, I think we're still doing a lot. We've had a lot in the past year. A lot of new initiatives, a lot of big projects. It's a lot of extra time. I stay later, get work done on weekends. We have to do to make sure we're still doing everything.
I think a lot of this discussion begs the question of, is it reasonable for both boards to expect both Joe and Helena to continue for at least another year and a half split like this without any additional help when the roles and responsibilities haven't decreased at all, and in fact with COVID they've increased for both districts.
I think you read my mind on that, Susan. That's really where I was kind of heading with this. If you're putting in the additional time without both of you are putting in additional time without compensation, kind of volunteering to work an additional, I don't know how many extra hours you're working every week. And I'm not sure that that's reasonable for us to expect that. It's certainly very generous, but it's not reasonable for us to expect it. And at some point, there is a level of ability that gets sacrificed when you're working that much. Understanding that you're working in very similar. It's not like you're going from an electrician's job to a computer job. You're working the same thing with two different operations, but that's a lot of time to be putting in. And I'm not at all suggesting that ETD has suffered from that time. But over another 2 years projected time, I think that's an awful lot. And maybe some of these personnel that we should be looking at should be people to help out with this situation and assist them.
One of the things, Angus, that we're going to be discussing is a staffing plan.
Yep.
For the districts, and that will include a few positions that the bus study recommended that we would probably look to accelerate the hiring of and not wait until the actual merger took place. And one of the things that we will discuss here is Dave did do a draft personnel organization chart. I didn't want to push that on this committee at this point because it can take quite a bit of time on its own to discuss, and that we will factor that into the next joint meeting and the next other meetings that we have. But obviously this is one of the issues that has to be dealt with within that context. The other thing to clarify for everyone is that Helena, her time, she's about 25% mat and 75% estuary. She is being compensated financially extra for her extra effort. She is receiving a bonus, a monthly bonus of $15 a month. That is not intended to be it's not an increase in her base salary. Once the merger takes place, she assumes her role. That will not continue. You know, her
Okay,
salary.
I have a related question to that then, similar to Joe's. Is Helena then, because she's doing 75-25, is she also performing in a lot of work on her own, Joe? Do you know, like you are?
Yeah, she's also, her and I both work later hours now. We're both
Absolutely.
here later than we used to be. And I know she works on the weekends too. So she has a laptop from Matt that she takes home.
And
So
I
you
ask her about that very, very frequently. And I think we need to be concerned about burnout among our key management people. And we only have two, well, including Margaret, that's 3 key management people. Margaret has not been spending any time on Matt, and apparently Joe doesn't plan to have her spend any time on Matt. But our finance manager and our executive director are really being pulled in different directions. And we still have federal audits, we still have financial audits, we still have all the requirements and record keeping that's associated with a very complex organization.
Susan,
yes.
can I jump in for a sec here? On the Helena issue, I think we need to keep a very open line of communication with Helena. When she feels that she's reached a point where Matt is under control, should she decide she wants to back away from that, never mind the bonus, but she just wants less work, Matt, she can oversee, but have someone else take care of the day-to-day business with Matt. I think we need to be able to relieve her of that and keep that in mind with your positions that you want to replace. The other thing that I just want on the record is this with Joe and Helena, but mostly with Joe. Who exactly is making the statement that ETD can run efficiently and possibly could grow or get improved or whatever with only a 60% executive director at the helm? Who made this decision that that's all we need?
Yeah, we've sort of backed into a part-time status for finance and key CEO management. And I think that concept, frankly, does need to be discussed more fully at the board level.
I would agree. Thank you.
If I can add one thing to this, because I know we're not going to talk about the staffing plan, but there is at some point going to be a discussion of what the organization should look like. And when we do, it's going to be noted that there are a number of new positions that need to be added that will help support Joe in his executive director role and support Helena in her finance manager role. And one of the one of the statements that's under staffing that's highlighted in red is, of course, that the DOT has to agree to provide the additional operating funds to hire those people. The staffing plan will evolve between things that probably should happen right away and things that don't need to happen until you get to the day of the merger. But among the things that probably could happen right away, if DOT can support them financially, is to add some positions that will relieve Joe, for example, of day-to-day managing operations in Middletown, and Helena of some of the less detailed, less high skill bookkeeping requirements at the estuary end.
I think that's a good point, Dave. And one of the things that we will talk about in the next week or so is a revised staffing plan that identifies with some degree of specificity which positions we want hired when. And that is something that I think we're going to look to Joe to make recommendations for us on. But I think as a board, these changes have occurred over 2 years without any real substantive discussion at the board level. And I think that that's an error that we need to correct. And I'm hoping that at our board meeting on December 18th, we'll be in a position to address it and talk about how we plan to proceed going forward. So that's all, and I think we're all on the same page here. We're concerned, and the idea that we can just keep doing this for 2 more years, roughly, is not something any of us really seems to feel comfortable with. Let me go back to the other transition issues, which is that under F, existing contracts that each district has would remain in place. And those include First Transit, legal, audit, insurance, and the Teamsters local. Joe, are there any other contracts besides those that you know of?
Well, I mean, of course, there's lots of contracts, but those are there's maintenance. I mean, there's lots of contracts, but those are the major ones.
Okay, we'll just say major.
Yeah.
Okay. G, DOT.
Excuse me, wait a minute. I don't think we should say major, because if you say major contracts remain in place, that leads to somebody to think that the other contracts don't have to remain in place. I think maybe we should just say such as.
Or including but not limited to.
Or including, however you want to phrase it.
Okay, thanks, Joe. G, DOT would continue to fund operations under the TODs currently in place. Dave had put this in, and I thought it deserved some discussion. Are the current TODs sufficient? And I guess that's a question for Joe. Or is this an item that even needs to be included here?
Well, I think what Dave means there is that we're going to continue to have separate TODs and not merge them yet.
Okay,
then the point.
I would say separate, because under the TODs currently in place also implies to me a level of funding that might change as positions get added.
Right. So yeah, we don't want more. I think how we would say it.
You don't need the currently in place is the part that you don't need.
Right.
If it just says DOT continues to fund operations of both MAT and ETD under separate TODs.
Separate TODs. Yep, that's good.
Okay, thank you. Number H, during the transition period prior to actual merger, revenues, expenses, and other assets will not be commingled between MAT and ETD. We've described this as a engagement, and until there's a marriage, we're not going to be giving each other any of their assets. We're all going to hang on to our own and hope that everything goes well at the altar. Each district should be responsible for any remediation due to financial audits, FTA audits, etc. And Joe, should that include anything else in that?
No, I don't think so. I think those are the major ones.
Okay. And then executive director would review the timeline for the merger and the study. And I think we should ask you to develop an implementation plan for the actual merger. The study, some of you might recall, for those of you who haven't memorized it, does have a time frame in it. We have missed some of those deadlines because we got started on the MOA process a little bit late, but it's a roadmap. And I think that what Joe could do is to take that and create an implementation plan for the merger that that speaks to when certain governance items will occur, when certain operational items will occur, when staff is notified, etc. When the facilities come online. And this seems to be, I think, a rather key element for both Matt and Estuary to have a roadmap for exactly what should happen when, in order for us to meet the majority of a merger to have taken place by July 1st, 22. The question is, should that implementation plan, and Joe, you have to let us know if that's something you feel comfortable doing. So let me ask you that.
Yes, yeah, I think I'm just pulling up the plan, that chart from the plan right now, so everyone can be reminded, because it's been a while since we've seen this
Yeah.
report.
There we go. I think
So-
what we'd want you to do is take a closer look at that and move things around, given what you now know and what the status of the current schedule is.
Yeah, I could definitely do that.
Okay. Should that schedule or implementation plan be part of the MOA? That's a question for everyone.
What would be the value of including it in the MOA?
That plan will include implicit commitment of funding by DOT and having them sign it as part of an MOA.
Yeah, but I thought, my thinking was that the budgetary items included in here, like hire HR director, blah, 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 that would be part of the MOA, and the implementation plan would be an offshoot of it based upon what we agree upon in the MOA. I
Mhm.
personally don't think that the implementation plan should be part of the MOA.
Okay. Angus?
That's just me.
Okay. No, that's why we're discussing it. Angus, do you have a feeling about it?
Well, not to contradict Joan at all, but I guess I don't I don't have a problem with the implementation being part of the MOA. I actually kind of lean the other way, that depending on what the MOA ends up looking like, I mean, is the MOA, how is the MOA even work without an implementation plan? There's got to be something in place that says how we're going to do it.
Mhm.
How about the idea that you reference it in your MOA?
Well, you know, my level of trust of anybody from DOT that I've worked with is minimal. I would, one of the things that I liked about it is it's that implementation plan, however it's developed, is signed by all three groups. And that says to me whether you follow through with it or not, at least I've got something in writing that says you said you were going to do this, that's done it.
Mhm.
And I'm inclined to think that that's important in this, but you know, I'm not sure how this MOA is going to look, so I don't know if that's.
Joe, do you have a feeling about this?
Yeah, I do. My only feeling, I don't have a problem with what Angus says at all. I understand the thinking behind it. But I think the implementation plan is really dependent in a number of instances based upon what agreed to in the MOA. So therefore, the implementation plan, I think, needs to be more formalized or secured after we have the agreements made through the MOA. Or maybe I should say use the word revised, because
Okay.
it depends upon what the agreements are, and especially the financial ones, as to what the implementation plan actually is going to be. So
Okay.
I would say if we're going to include it in there, we have to make sure that we consider it as a living document, not a final document that we present up front, but something that we present after the agreements have come through and before we sign off on the MOA. Then it would be put into the MOA. I'm fine with that.
Yeah,
Angus, do you agree with that?
yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It is something that, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we have to see the implementation plan first.
Okay,
See what it is.
that's where I was going. And so, you know, and one of the nice things about being chairman is you can punt on some of these things. Let's say that
Yeah.
what we need to do is have see the implementation plan, have a discussion about it, see how Middletown reacts to it, see what the rest of the MOA looks like, and
Mhm.
make a decision after all of those things take place about whether to include it. The fact is, we all feel we need it, and that's
Right.
something we begin to work on now. Okay. So going back now to all of these transition issues, staffing, contracts, TODs, all that sort of stuff. The threshold question is, these are all things that will guide the operations of both districts between now and when an actual merger takes place. Do these things need to be in the MOA? Do they need to be in a separate document that is signed only by the two districts? Or do they need to be in a document that's signed by anyone?
Well, I think that because G specifically refers to CD, to the Department of Transportation, that we either include it in the MOA or a separate document but signed by all three parties.
You mean just because all we're saying is that the Department of Transportation will continue to fund each district it has been? We could take that one element out and put it under finances, for example,
We could do that.
down below. But what about the other issues, Joan? Do you see all these things going into an actual MOA? Angus, how about you?
Well, I don't see how something like item E can go into an MOA when it ends in a question mark. I think that needs to be established before it gets in there.
Okay. I'm going to give you my take on this. I think that the more detail we put in this MOA that is subject to DOT's agreement to sign, the more they start to react to the detail. And most of these items, in my view, are issues between the two districts, with the exception of the point that Joan just made about the separate TODs, and we could handle that
Yeah.
elsewhere. OA. These items to me seem to be primarily how the two districts agree with each other they are going to operate. And that will,
I think that's, sorry.
go ahead. I'm done.
No, I didn't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry. I took a
Problem.
breath and I jumped in. Sorry about that. I agree. Most of these issues should definitely be part of any agreement between us and MAT. I just think something like I mentioned, we have to figure out what's going to happen with this current arrangements before we can put it in there.
You mean
I
in
don't
terms,
think we can
yeah,
put it in
and
there.
in terms of the staffing, Angus?
Yeah, we're asking a question here as to how are we going to, is this a sufficient staffing?
Mhm.
We certainly at least have to have an answer to that before we put it in there. But I do think that I agree with you 100%. The more detail we put in here, the more DOT will have to pay attention to the detail. I think right now they're just looking at this great big picture.
Right.
This is what we want.
Mhm.
Let's
Okay.
just go.
How about on this? Leslie, do you have an opinion, by the way?
Well, I have to agree with Angus, and I think with you as well, Susan. I think the more, you said, the more they look at it, the more blah, blah, blah. I want them to look at it. I want them to be totally accountable for every single piece of ingredient. I think what they've done to date is say, you guys will merge, have a nice day. And that's not acceptable. They have to be called into this process, whether they're kicking and screaming or not. I think every detail's got to go under their nose before we sign anything or before we accept anything.
Okay.
Well, the other point to be made is that I think either putting it in the MOA or in a separate document that has to be signed by DOT also, I think it lets DOT know the agreements that the two boards have made in order to operate during this merger discussion and process. And I think somehow or other they should know exactly the details that we've been dealing with as two separate boards.
Okay. I think there's a general consensus then that we would include some or all of this in an MOA. Why don't, for next steps on this particular issue, Joe and Dave discuss this with the MAT committee, which meets tomorrow. And we're meeting jointly on Friday, and we can circle back on this particular issue. And I'm not uncomfortable with letting it hang out there for a while, because there are so many other things we haven't finally decided on, that how all the pieces fit together may not be apparent immediately. But are there any other items related to the transition? And I guess this is a question primarily for Joe, that are not included in this list that should be, that you can think of?
I think this is, everything's broad enough that it covers it all. It's not, obviously it's not the detailed list, but
Okay.
it's a good
All right.
broad overview
Okay.
of it.
So general consensus is that we will include something in the MOA regarding transition pending agreement and discussion with Matt, and further discussion about the staffing issue. Okay. Number 2, governance. Starting now, these are the items that would be included in the MOA. And again, I think just to make sure we capture all the points of view that we need on these, we'll just briefly go over them. MAT will dissolve and member towns will merge into the existing estuary structure. This was an actual recommendation in the bus study. Joint board composition and voting will conform to state statute, which,
Susan, yeah,
go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but on the second point, there was, at least in our earlier meeting, there was some, it was pointedly requested that at this point, when we talk about MOA elements, that we make clear that it only be the existing member towns that would become part of the new board, as opposed to the possibility of additional towns being added when the when the merged organization comes into being. Was it important to take that out or leave it in?
Well, take what out, David?
Well, there's Joe's put up a slide that shows,
Yeah, right, with the additional towns
all
going
of the
there, right?
existing members, but suggests there might be some additional members
Right.
that are not current. And when we met the other day, I specifically put into my notes something to the effect that initially, at least, only towns that are currently members of ETD or MAT would become part of the new organization. That in the future you could add towns, but at least initially the board would only be representing the towns that are currently represented. Do you care whether we leave that open or not? That's my question.
I think we lost Susan.
Uh-oh.
That's why we're not hearing from her.
See, I agree with David. I think the original merger should be just the existing towns.
That
And then
was,
part of the bylaws or whatever have you, there be a provision in there as to the process for additional towns to be incorporated.
right. So that was our discussion the other day, because number one, those are towns we know are going to be coming over. And we also felt that this next year and a half, there's going to be so much else going on that we're not going to be trying to recruit new members in that period. Susan's not back yet.
Did we lose Susan?
Yeah, we did.
Looks like it. Yeah, that was a good point, David, and a point well taken from me anyway, because I was under the impression that this was going to move forward only with existing or current members.
Well, and it came up because of this page here in the study where it looked at the other
Right.
possible
Yeah.
members that might join.
Yeah.
Haddam's listed here, even though Haddam's not currently a member. They were, if you remember, Haddam was interested in joining us before all this started.
Right.
But then that was back in like January, and of course, the world changed in February. So
Yeah.
they're still interested, but of course not going to hold a town meeting at the moment for it. I think Susan's back.
Ryan.
Well, I could tell jokes while we're waiting for her. No?
Susan's back on the call, but her camera's off and it doesn't show that she has audio.
No.
So do you want me to tell jokes or not?
Remember, we're being recorded.
Oh, sorry. Yep. Okay, that's it for me then. I'm done.
This isn't townoflyme.org.
Oh, sorry. Hey, Ralph sends his regards by the way. Susan was talking to him the other day.
Oh,
And
is she?
Did she tell you he's
No.
become the mayor of his town that he's living
I had
in?
heard that.
He just can't give it up, can he?
Nope.
You could probably keep going through the outline.
Yeah, let me go back to
because-
that page.
You can come back to that item because the next one is simply saying that the composition of the board and voting would conform to state statute. That isn't to say that when you write bylaws, you couldn't go a little farther and to say,
Right.
for example, that it's going to not just require a majority of the weighted vote, but at least 5 towns have to,
Right.
the number of towns that have participated in the positive vote has to be part of it. But you write that into the bylaws. You're not going
And
to worry.
Leslie would
Aye.
know this because Leslie was part of the drawing up the bylaws, our current bylaws, where we have the quorum is both votes and number of towns,
Right. Yeah,
And
because we have to
what-
wait.
because you were
Can
concerned
we,
about.
if you
not
do
enough
mention
towns.
this to Susan, let's.
She's on.
Hello.
She's back.
I'm back. I'm sorry, everyone. We lost power multiple times up here.
Oh.
Anyway,
That's what you get for living in the boonies.
I know. So I am sorry. So were you still talking about 2B?
No, we were talking about you. We moved on, but just for, from a grammar standpoint, if you have joint board composition and voting, that should be conform, not conforms. That's all.
That's what I missed? Okay,
Alexis
Um,
was gonna tell jokes, but she didn't.
okay. So 2B, and again, that's all governed by state statute. C, the new joint bylaws will be developed and we can use those to deal with such issues as quorum, to identify, well, to make it easier for us to conduct business the way we would like to. One of the concerns I think all of us is that the number of member towns is going to increase significantly. The larger your board, the more difficult it is to make nimble decisions and innovate and things like that. So we're going to have to do the best we can do. Included in the study is a listing of the various towns that would be included at the beginning and what their relative vote share would be. As usual, Lyme is ground zero. We're one. Anything else on governance?
I know what you missed, Susan. Right when you were dropping off, Dave was just pointing out that we had discussed when we met that we were thinking about only the current members joining initially, and then the potential new members at a later date. And Dave just wanted to make sure that's what we were still our thinking. So
When
that's what
you
we
say-
were just discussing.
Okay, when you say joining initially, you mean on, let's say, January or July 1st, 2022?
Right. Well, yes. The Middletown towns would be the ones joining. And so it would be the existing estuary board as it is today. Plus 9, plus the 3 towns coming over from Middletown.
Okay.
Potentially Portland as well. I know Portland is ready to join. They've just been waiting for this to happen.
How does everyone else feel about that?
Well, that's what we discussed while you were gone, and that's I absolutely, that's what I understood was going to be happening.
Okay. Joan, you're okay with that?
Excuse
we
me one
we
second, I'll
lost
be right
Joan
back.
now. Now we lost Joan. She must have lost power too.
Yeah, it's really windy out there. Okay.
Well, I'm still here and I'm willing to tell jokes. Don't-
Okay.
But
Um,
I think, did Joan comment on that? I don't remember.
On the joke. Oh, no, on the towns?
Yeah, I thought
I
she
don't think
did.
Joan had a problem with it.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Then we can change that language to reflect that, Dave.
Yes, got it.
Okay. Alrighty. 2C, new joint bylaws. Dave's going to be working on a comparison of the bylaws between Matt and Estuary for one of our future joint committee meetings. We will develop the bylaws concurrent with a lot of these other processes as we go along. Okay. Anything else on governance? All right, let's hope Joan can find her way back. Understaffing, we want there to be no adverse change in compensation or employment conditions as a result of the merger. DOT to provide increased operating funds for new positions identified in the study. Those are the 3 they identified in the study. There may be others based on what Joe comes up with in an organization chart, and the time frame would be determined, and that is highlighted in red. So that would be a quote deal breaker issue. In other words, if DOT was not willing to commit to that according to a time frame that we do insert into the MOA, that would be a deal breaker. Are people in agreement about that, the importance of that issue?
Yeah, I am.
Okay. C, personnel policies and procedures would be consistent for all staff. I don't even know, is that really necessary, Joe?
Well, it will be. We don't want to manage two sets of policies or
I mean,
three.
I know, but does it need to go in the MOA?
Oh, is it? No, that's probably just a joint agreement on the,
Okay,
well, I guess the only way it might be though,
okay,
is there's a cost. So, only the financial part of it, yes, that CONDOT agrees to, cover the cost of making them the same, but I don't think we want anything more in that
Well,
in the MOA.
won't that come into play when it comes time to union concerns?
Yeah, some of it is union.
I personally, I don't see how you can move forward with this without one policy and one procedure.
okay.
I just said some of the challenge will be that, say, for example, the benefit, the policy on benefits is very different up there.
Yep.
Middletown. Yeah, they only contribute towards single health insurance costs and nothing for two-person or family. So
Okay.
that is going to be
So-
a huge cost impact. So I think the financial side we want DOT to commit to, but we don't want too much detail either.
Right, and we certainly aren't going to level down.
Right. No, we want to make that clear that, like you said in that first point, that there's no adverse change to either side.
Right.
And so there is a cost. Again, we don't want to get too detailed into our policies because
Okay,
but
then I
they
think
cover the financial cost.
3C as it's currently stated is probably fine then.
Okay.
Okay, finances. We have talked a lot about this at the board level and other places, that our respective fund balance would remain with the merged entity at the time of the merger. Based on what we talked about up in the transition section, is their fund balance would remain with Middletown, ours would remain with us. This deals with after the merger takes place, we will have both of these fund balances that would stay with the merged entity as opposed to being picked off by DOT. And it seems to me that that is also a deal breaker, that we don't want them to be able to use any of our fund balances to fund the things that they said they were going to fund from the state. And like a marriage, while we're engaged, theirs is theirs and ours is ours. Once we combine, theirs is ours and ours is theirs.
But it's not
But,
DOT's.
but neither of those is DOT's.
That's right.
Correct. There may be a more artful way of saying that. I don't know.
I've got it.
Pardon?
I get it.
Okay. All right. 4B, member towns will not incur any additional cost due to the merger. That's kind of a policy statement.
As far as I'm concerned, you put an exclamation point in red behind that one.
All righty. Okay. And 4C is that MAT assets under the mechanical way we're going to do this, which is MAT dissolves and comes under the ETD umbrella, is that their assets would be transferred to the merged entity under ETD. Do people agree that 4A and B are deal breaker status?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. I hope Joan can get back. Okay, number
She's
5.
trying. I guess she lost her Comcast, she said. So
Yeah.
So I'm a bit quiet. I'm texting her the call
Okay.
details. She's trying to call in.
Our generator wasn't quite sure what it was supposed to be doing. That's why I couldn't get back in for a while too. Okay, 5A, operations and service. Service in both districts to remain at least at current levels subject to board direction and available funding. The idea here being that there's not going to be any reduction in service as a result of the merger. That doesn't mean that the state might not impose a reduction in service on all transit districts as it did a couple of years ago due to the state budget deficit. All this deals with is that the merger itself is not going to result in any diminution of service.
I just have a question.
Yeah.
Does the inclusion of saying and available funding give the DOT a way out? Because they can always find the money, but what they'll do is cut us before they cut some other district. And I'm looking at that as a back door for them. Do we need that?
Well, I guess the way I would approach that is that if the state imposes a statewide cut on transit districts, we are going to be subject to that, just whether we were going to merge or not.
But if you don't have that language in there, maybe they have to think twice about making us the first guy. We are, historically, the first ones to get cut. Not the big gun, Hartford
Transit
won't.
districts are, right. Transit
So-
districts as a whole.
To say why do you need end available funding? Why do you need that? Can't you just stop it, subject to board direction, period?
I don't have a problem with that. Angus?
Well, I think it's when you take out available funding, and I agree, it leaves a little bit open there, but if you take that out, I don't see how you can make that a deal breaker, because the state will say, well, look at our transportation fund already know is going to get creamed this year.
Right.
We know it's going to get creamed next year. We can't guarantee that you're not going to, that's a deal breaker for, I don't see how that's not a deal breaker for them.
Okay, but isn't that their responsibility to cue in on the fact that we didn't add it in?
No.
Which
That's
item
okay.
are we on?
What's the advantage to us
Hey,
of putting in?
on
putting that in?
Joan, we're on 5A.
It's okay with me if you take it out, if everybody agrees it.
Okay.
I just think it's, well, let's hope they don't see it.
I think what Angus is saying is we can present it that way, but then we have to be ready to negotiate it back to what it is today if it's going to be a deal breaker.
Yeah.
Well, here's a question then. Should it be a deal breaker?
I think that, I think yes, as it's written now, but like Leslie said, we could certainly try to negotiate it without available funding. But as it is written now, yes, we shouldn't expect that we're going to lose service unless we choose to change service as a result of this.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Joan, do you have a comment on it? I know you're trying to catch up here.
Not yet. I'm trying to catch up.
Okay. The issue is whether under 5A to continue the phrase at the end and available funding. That by leaving it in there, DOT has the option to cut funding, which it has in the past. Leslie is suggesting that we eliminate and available funding and see how well we do with them. There are obviously going to be negotiated items with DOT.
Right.
Yeah,
I
So
agree.
we can always throw that back in when they ask for it, but to have it in there, I just think makes the statement that we're prepared to be cut if necessary. I just I would like to close that door a little bit.
I'm comfortable with that. Angus?
Yeah, that's fine. That sounds
Same
good.
with me.
Joan? Okay. B, Matt and ETD personnel will continue to operate their respective services till merger occurs and for the foreseeable future after the merger. In other words, we're not going to reassign a Middletown driver to a shoreline route and vice versa. Did I get that right, Dave?
Yes, but I was going to ask why that would not also be a deal breaker item. I could imagine somebody saying, we'll try to figure out how the union issue plays out, but
Yeah.
we think that there ought to be, that half the service between the shoreline and Middletown should be operated by Middletown drivers and half by shoreline drivers. There may be some efficiencies that are gained by moving work around, but this gets you out of this. This avoids the union issue for the foreseeable future. Because
All right,
if you don't say this, then you have to confront the issue of the union objecting if you have non-union drivers doing what they used to do, or vice versa.
okay. So you're suggesting, Dave, that we make that a deal breaker.
Yeah. I don't know that anyone will disagree, but it ought to be pretty clear that you're not.
I think you want to have it in there because I think Condot will try and get some moved up to Middletown.
Well, then the answer to them is that you've got to figure out how to finesse the union issue, and we'd rather not.
And
Wrestle with that as part of this agreement.
Having estuary drivers do Middletown work is pretty clearly we can't do that because of the contract. But the other way around could happen if we allowed it. Not that we want to, but I'm saying that one DOT could push for if they wanted to. And
Joe,
we're not there's nothing prohibiting it, but there is something prohibiting it the other way around.
Are you recommending that we keep that item in the MOA and make it a deal breaker?
Yeah, I think we leave it that's our decision. It would have to be mutually agreed upon by the boards to change.
All right, so Dave, we need some different language there.
Okay.
Yeah,
Joe makes a good point that if the labor costs in estuary are higher than they are in Middletown,
right.
then I could, you want to protect against somebody coming in and say, on the day you merge, let's replace higher paid estuary drivers with lower paid Teamsters from Middletown.
Yeah.
Right.
To do the same, run the same routes.
Right. And as I said, that could easily happen because there's nothing prohibiting that. Our contract prohibits the other way around. So MAP drivers are protected by their contract. Our drivers are not protected at all.
Okay, so we will consider some more specific language under 5B and make it a deal breaker.
Okay.
All righty, good
So
point.
Leslie, did you agree?
Do I agree?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw you shaking your head earlier.
Oh, was I? Okay. No, I didn't mean to be shaking my head.
Okay.
I'm fine with it. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else under ops and service that we haven't included here? And of course, we may think of things as we go along and add stuff, but this will be our baseline. Okay, 6, A, B, C, and D all relate to their promises of capital facilities. And all of them are scheduled as deal breakers. A, the parties agreed to develop the facilities plan as recommended in the study. B, the parties agree to implement the plan, including those 3 different capital activities, expanded O&M for the existing Middletown facility, a new shared facility in Middletown, and a new shoreline facility. Under C, DOT to provide capital funding and increased operating funds to maintain the new and renovated facilities. And D, DOT agrees to purchase land for all new facilities by 7/1/21. I threw that in there as a date. That's consistent actually with what was in the timeline of the consultant study. How realistic, Joe, is that July 1st date? And should we not worry about how realistic it is and make DOT come back and put something else in there?
Yeah, it's definitely not realistic Definitely not on the shoreline, probably not even on Middletown, even though they're moving on Middletown.
Should there
But
be
there should be a
some,
date. There should be a date.
all right, what should that date be?
It's got to be before the July 1, 2022.
Okay, how
that we're
about this?
planning.
Why don't you think about it and come up with a date?
Okay.
Can
Go
sorry,
ahead,
can I
Dennis.
just ask a question of Joe? What do you mean about Middletown too? I thought last I heard, and I know I'm not the best source on this, but last I heard, DOT had moved forward with Middletown.
It's moving.
Angus,
It's moving, but there's just a lot of process to go through.
Angus, you may not be aware that the owner of the property in Middletown changed his mind. And that,
Well,
No,
they
I was not
did.
aware.
So they did, but I
Thank
think
you,
I
sir.
think we came up, it seems like we came up with a perfectly good solution for them. We met with them last week, and I think that they're fine with it. And the city's able to
What's the
provide.
solution?
So the city has property. So I'll go back to what happened was that they've done a lot of the surveys already, and everything was moving nicely. And then ONG comes back and says, well, now we actually realize that we use this warehouse and the rail on the third parcel that they still have listed for sale. But yeah, now
ONG
they're saying,
is the owner of the property?
yeah. And so they say, well, can we keep at least some access to it, or the whole parcel, or access to it? So of course you went back to the engineer and so can it be done? Yes, but you'll be at capacity the day it's built. So wouldn't be a good idea. But I knew that the city of Middletown has property just on the other side of the tracks from there where they are today. And so I asked Joe Simolis, who manages that property for the city and is also chairman of MAT, if that would be an option. And so he said, absolutely. And there's other parcels too. So we met with them Wednesday, and they were going to just go back and just double check with the people who manage that business unit, but they thought that was probably fine. So it looks like that's okay.
okay,
But there's still so many other even if that's fine and everything, none of this stuff happens quick, and there's
Okay, so
there's
the way
several more studies to do, and then you got to go through all the closing and all that stuff, and all the appraisals, and it's a process.
so the way we'll leave it then is that, Joe, you'll come up with a date. We all believe a date should be in there.
I mean, why don't we just say by the end of 2021? I think, and let them try and push that back if they need to, but we need some time before we're planned to actually be totally merged.
Okay, all right. With regard to 6A, B, C, and D, are we in agreement about?
Well, wait a minute. I have a comment. It's just Susan for A.
Sure.
I would suggest when it says parties agree to develop a facilities plan as recommended in the study, it says funding for such study to be provided by CTDOT, which could lead somebody to think the study that we has already done. I would suggest changing the word study to plan to map to the facilities plan.
Perfect. Good catch. Thank you, Joan. All righty. So we're going to stick with A, B, C, D.
And we might want to say anything like that. We might want to say CTD, DOT, and or FTA.
And or FT.
Anything with funding like that, we should probably say that just in case they want to use federal money.
Okay, and CTDOT can commit federal funds.
Yes, they can. They can commit that they're going to put it in the capital plan.
Okay, then the only other change is under D, where we will say purchase land for all new facilities by December 31st, 2021. Okay, anything else under facilities? Alrighty, special studies. A, additional studies were proposed in the regional study. What we're asking for here is that Joe would identify which studies we need and when we would need them. So, branding would be later, HR, legal, facility market and site review, whatever that. So we would be looking to you, Joe, to list which of those additional consultant studies need to be completed, need to be done, and when they should be completed by, so that this in the MOA is a schedule of what those additional studies are. And then B would be a deal breaker, which would mean that DOT would agree to fund those studies in the time frame that we identify.
Okay.
Comments? Okay.
Good.
All righty. Time frame. All right, we already talked about a target date for a merger completion of 7/1/22. We might want to say something instead of complete merger or substantial completion of merger or something like that, as there may be little tail end things that move farther than that. Dave, why don't we talk later about what the correct phraseology there might be?
Yeah, I think you used some good language earlier when we talked about that the goal is to have the merger technically complete by 7/1/22, but then there are wind down activities that continue thereafter. And that's
Okay.
part of the parties' agreement.
Okay.
Actually, if I may say, a lot of what we're doing today is helpful not so much to write the MOA, but to frame what will be the discussion when the joint meeting with the DOT ever happens. I mean,
Right.
Right. We talked about sometime between the middle of this week and 2 weeks from now to try to get a meeting of the 2 MOA committees and the executive director, and I think the consultant, and certainly whoever from DOT needs to sit down and go through some of this stuff, because this is, if the DOT gives you the wrong answer on many of these deal breaker questions, it throws the whole thing, it really stops the process. If they can feel comfortable saying, yeah, we can commit to those things, then we plunge ahead with an MOA.
I don't foresee the into these specifics. I think
Oh, no.
what I have in mind is a more of a procedural meeting. This is what we're doing. Who are you going to be assigning to this project? How is it that you would like to be involved? I do not want to start a discussion with them ahead of time about what our deal breaker issues are until they are completely agreed to between Matt and ETD. So this initial meeting is going to be one of probably several as we move forward. Okay, under 8B, milestones expected by July 1st of 21. We would have some hiring of additional operations staff there, and that's dependent on Joe's recommendations to each board about what the proper level of staffing is. Land acquisition for new Middletown and Shoreline facilities would take place now by December 21st of 2021. Various special studies would be funded and initiated. Is there anything else we would expect to be completed by July 1st? Assuming again that the MOA is signed on March 1st. Okay. Are there any other items that anyone can think of now that we haven't covered in this initial overview of what would be included in the MOA? That doesn't mean things won't surface when we talk to Matt or we talk to our board. Okay. What I would like to do is to move to the next item on the agenda and then do a quick executive session. The next item on the agenda is what process we want to use to inform our full board and get the go-ahead to pursue these various items. Leslie, I'm glad you're with us at this point. Of course, we'll report to our board at its regular meeting on the status of these things. The real question is, how far can this committee go without checking back with the full board?
You're asking me, or is that a general question?
It's a general question, but as board chair, you have a.
Well, as board chair, historically, the board has never, Joe can correct me, to my knowledge, dictated how any of the committees operates or makes decisions, because so far we've never had a problem. And I would hate for you all to feel that your hands were tied. We've put our trust in your committee to do right by us for these negotiations. So how far can you go? I think before you sign anything, it goes back to the board for discussion. But I don't think that we want to be telling the three of you how to do this, do we?
Okay. I think that then what you'll, as the board chair, will expect is that when the three of us feel that an issue is significant enough to send it to the board, that we will do that on a case-by-case basis.
Well, yeah, the other thing you can do too is, I mean, you and I communicate all the time, and other committee chairs have certainly contacted me directly. If you have issues that are concerning, let's talk, and let me help determine whether or not it can wait as an agenda item, or whether I send it off as an update. For example, we do have a couple of things right now that are on the table that I will be writing an update to the entire board, but I'm waiting for all the answers so that I'm not just constantly hitting you all with, by the way, here's what's up.
Okay.
Because I think waiting for a board meeting every 2 months while we're in such critical decision-making mode would be a mistake. I think everybody needs to be informed, and this board's not afraid of asking questions, So when you get up there with your report, be prepared.
Sure. Okay. Well, I'm comfortable with moving ahead like that, and the three of us can, set an agenda, and I think we'll know without much question which issues we want to touch base back with you. And by the way, I think the board chairs are going to sign this MOA, not the joint committee people.
Oh yeah, I think you're right
Absolutely.
Right,
Yeah.
absolutely, yep.
Because we want you to know we're right behind you.
And that would require a resolution of the board, so.
In the
Yeah.
event it goes
At
south.
what point am I personally liable? Just let me know. Just fill me in on that one.
Okay. One last thing on this MOA element. We made a few changes, but there seems to be a general consensus that we're comfortable with these items. And what one of the next steps would be for us to, revise based on our conversations today. And then Dave are going to be on here, and some of which will be separate. And then at that point, we will combine the lists of what they want and what we want.
Susan, at what point do we ask David which committee he likes more? Who do you love, David? Who do you love, sweetie?
I would like at this point, and are we all in agreement that we're comfortable with the MOA elements as they currently stand, with the understanding that things can and will change as we get farther along in the process?
I think so.
Yeah.
Okay. I would like to entertain a motion to go into executive session to discuss contract
moved.
negotiations. Joan, thank you. Second, Angus, thank
Yeah, I'll second that, but I'm wondering who's going to be included in that meeting, everyone?
that would include the three of us, Leslie, Joe, and Dave.
Okay, so that's everybody. Okay.
So-
And
I'll
I'm
invite-
sorry, what was the
invite them all
purpose?
in.
I'm sorry, I missed the purpose.
To discuss contract negotiations with DOT. Okay, now, are we in
Just,
executive?
We're
Hang
still
on.
Yeah,
recording.
let's-
Are we
Yeah,
there?
my-
record.
No, we lost power for a second and that screwed up, locked up my whole computer. Even though I'm still on, I lost all control of Zoom. So I'm trying to get back. I might get dropped for a minute while I get back in, but I can.
Okay,
stop this.
so then we should not be discussing anything yet.
So don't discuss anything yet because we're still recorded.
Okay, I'm sorry this is taking so long, everybody, but it's
Okay.
important. And I do have a couple of things that, not for decision making, but I need everyone to begin to think about. So we'll wait for Joe to unrecord.
Could I ask something? After the changes are made to the document that we discussed during this session, and before Dave sends it to Middletown, could we just see a quick copy for a review?
Absolutely.
What's going to happen tomorrow is we're going to have a conversation with the Middletown Committee.
I know that. I know that.
Hopefully have put together their own list of what they view as deal breaker issues.
They have not.
I know that. I'm just asking that what we discuss here today, if we could get a copy of it before you send it to Middletown, that's all.
Yes. I tell you what, I will, Dave, I'll work on something right after this meeting, send it to you and Joe. And
Fine.
if you guys are okay, then we'll send it out to Angus and Leslie and Joan,
Okay.
Okay.
because I kept pretty good notes as far as that goes.
Okay. I think I am. Got it.
Angus, have you got power in Deep River?
So far, so good. We just lost a tree. That's why I had to get up a minute ago. We just lost a tree that went across a major road.
Where,
It's
or
some
in the
wires,
middle,
but-
in the center of town?
No, up Westbrook Road.
Oh, down Westbrook Road.
Brings us to Iverton and to Westbrook.
Well, I'm just checking my battery here. We're still on the grid. How cool is this? You see my,
I don't know.
see, there you got the grid on one side and our house on the other. And it's
Oh,
not,
okay.
It's not giving me control.
a power flow chart.
Oh, what happened?